podcast about loving stuff. My name is Daniel Thron. You may recognize my voice from Martini Giant, a podcast about movies, that you can check out at www.martinigiant.com. This podcast isn't necessarily about movies, but people come here to talk about things they love, ideas, concepts, lines from books, moments in time, people, history, anything. If you're interested in being on Love It, I'd love to have you. And you can reach me at dthron on Twitter, or check out my YouTube page at dthron as well. So let's see, today, what do I love? I loved the sequel novel Heat 2, which is a sequel to the movie Heat. There is no Heat 1 novel. It's written by the director Michael Mann in conjunction with Meg Gardner, who's a terrific crime writer. And I was really shocked to find that this is easily one of the best crime reads that I've come across in many years. I hope they make a movie out of it, but even if they never get to, this was absolutely beautiful, incredibly tense, and made me love a movie that I loved already even more. And speaking of movies, I just rewatched the movie Ad Astra by James Gray starring Brad Pitt. This one isn't for everybody. It's science fiction. It's very, very, very slow and sort of emotionally methodical. It's very beautiful. James Gray, I don't think, has ever made a science fiction movie. But every time I watch it, I'm overwhelmed. And it makes me very thankful for the things I get to experience in the day-to-day. And today, I love talking to Chris Nichols. Chris and I met at a visual effects company called Digital Domain. And if you've ever seen Tom Cruise's movie Oblivion, or Joseph Kosinski's Tron Legacy, or David Fincher's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, then you've seen Chris's work. He's currently the host of an incredibly popular tech podcast called CG Garage, and he and I have co-hosted Martini Giant with our friend Eric Sheely for years. I always love talking to Chris, but today we got to talk about something very different from all that. This is my conversation with Chris Nichols. I hope you love it.
I know you want this podcast to go short, but it's not going to be short. I'm sorry about that. Because I have a certain level of obsession and on this particular subject, to the point where if someone asks me directions to the 7-Eleven, I'm going to start talking about fishing within the first 5 seconds of that conversation. So,
well, in a particular kind of fishing.
It is a particular kind of fishing, but I did start with just fishing, right? So it started with just fishing, and when I was a kid, that's what I wanted to do. I loved the idea of fishing. It was something about catching a fish that was very exciting to me. And I think part of it was my storytelling, believe it or not. My father, when I lived in Greece, as you might remember, as a kid, and we used to go to the Greek islands every summer and spend just months and months, renting a house or whatever, and just I would walk down every afternoon with a bamboo fishing pole and a bobber trying to catch small fish. And I remember stories of my dad telling me stories when he was a kid. Apparently, he used to go to his grandfather invited the family to Bermuda, and they would go fishing, and he would fish in Bermuda. And apparently he got a job as a deckhand on a charter fishing boat, and he learned fishing that way as a teenager. And he caught a giant, big, like a record wahoo, which is a kind of fish that you catch. And he has a picture of him as at the age of 16 with this big wahoo, kind of the classic fishing picture of the dead fish, on a hooking there. And so, and to me, it was like this awe, right, that I had. And then he told me about another kind of fish that he had caught, called a bonefish, which is a very special fish and an important part of this story. And a bonefish is a kind of fish that generally you catch them in shallow flats. So they're in very shallow water, generally speaking. They're like anything from 1 to 2 feet of water. and they come in on the flats depending on the tide, and they're looking for small crustaceans and stuff like that. And they're not that big. They're maybe 12 to 18 inches or so. There's some bigger ones, but that would be 18 inches is a really big bonefish. And they're very silvery. So that silver side that makes it very mirror-like and hard to see because it sort of reflects the environment around you. Because they go into shallow water, their defense one is their camouflage, right? But it also makes them very vulnerable to fish that can see them very easily, right? So their first defense is the camouflage, and the second defense is speed. So a small fish, 12 to 18 inches, will dart like 30 miles an hour. And they're very spooky, right? Because they're constantly got an eye out for birds.
This happens almost instantaneously. They go from like 0 to 60.
They go to, almost instantly, right? Yeah. So they're always looking for birds, right? In case something happens. So they spook really easily. So you have to be very, very, very stealthy when you're around them. And generally you do something that's, most people think of fishing of just throwing something in the water and waiting for a fish to bite. This is you're looking for the fish and you cast trying not to scare it and hoping to be in a situation to it. So it's much more like hunting in a sense. And that's called sight casting. So you're sighting for the fish. But anyway, my dad wasn't doing this fly fishing. He was doing it in the traditional fishing method. So I got fascinated by these fishing stories and then got fascinated by this mysterious fish called a bonefish. And I was, still living in Greece, and bone fishing was not very well known. And it's mostly in the tropics. But I got sort of fascinated by this whole process of fishing, and I loved fishing and continued fishing here and there.
Was there a dip in your interest? Did you pick it back up?
No. I always and you'll see it even today, if there is a body of water nearby, I am going to look for fish in it, no matter what. If it's a puddle, I'm going to look for fish.
Right.
And so I have this passion for understanding this and seeing this, and it's that has evolved over the years, but this is something that happened. So, I did have an interest in, and I continued to fish when I had an opportunity. I always had an interest, right? But then the next time I sort of really picked it up was in grad school. I was going to grad school in Texas. I went to Rice University in Houston. And me and a couple other guys, we've all said, we love fishing. And there's fishing that you can do on the coasts of Texas, which are for some really cool fish, very special fish. One of them is called a speckled trout, which is a sea trout. It's really good. And another very well-known fish is called a redfish or a red drum. And they're also along the coasts, and you can also sight cast for them, et cetera, et cetera. But we use traditional fishing, which is just, your regular rod and reel. There was always a passion for trying to go to fly fishing, but we were poor grad students, and fly fishing is freaking expensive.
It's a big step. It's an investment.
It's a huge step, right? And so I've always kind of wanted to go fly fishing, but I was like, I can't invest in it.
You had talked about fishing prior to when you were really into fly fishing. But there was this sort of a moment in our history when suddenly fly fishing really took over your extracurricular attention and became a major focus. And just to give, I don't know, we can preview it, but you film tying flies and making little videos about this stuff that I think are incredibly compelling. So just to give a hint to the audience as to where this goes.
You have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes, right? There's a fishing rabbit hole, and then there's a fly fishing, which is a world that's bigger than fishing itself.
It's a rabbit hole within a rabbit hole.
Traditional fishing, you have a rod and you have a reel, right? And then the reel holds line. And the line is usually monofilament. Sometimes nowadays, back when I was in the early days, it was mostly just monofilament line that you would have on there. And monofilament line, you would traditionally put what's called a leader on there. And for what we were fishing, the leader is usually a heavier line. And then you put depending on whatever rig you're doing. But that line has a weight on it, right? And there's usually a lead weight, and it's either like an egg sinker or kind of a different kinds of weight, right? So when you're casting your line, what you're doing is the rod has a bend and flips this weight. The weight is what's carrying everything out there, right? The
Right.
bigger the weight, the further it's going to go.
You're
but it's
putting
also
the
gonna make a
momentum
bigger
into the weight, and that's what's really
right.
carrying the whole
It's
thing
going to make a
through.
bigger splash or whatever else it's going to do, depending on the size of the weight. If you have a lighter weight, it's not going to go as far, right? And then you also have the length of your rod, right? So if you want to throw a big weight way out there, hoping to catch a giant shark in the surf, you'll have like a 10-foot surf rod and a two-hand, like, that's the kind of thing that you're doing, right? Or if you were doing what we were doing in Texas, we used to go to this island called Matagorda Island, which was amazing, which used to have this ferry boat. Man, it was so cool. We would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning almost every Saturday, drive my beat up freaking car from Houston to Port O'Connor, which was a 3-hour drive, right? We would get to Port O'Connor at 7 o'clock in the morning. We would have breakfast at this crappy diner, but they had really good pork chop and egg breakfast, right? And then we would get into this. It was so cheap. This was the best part of it. We had so much fun for so little money. It was just the best process. And we get onto this ferry. That was this dinky ferry that took you to Matagorda Island. Matagorda Island is an uninhabited island. It's a wildlife refuge, but it used to have an Air Force base on it. So there's this weird abandoned Air Force base that's there. You can stay in the barracks if you wanted to. You want to pay some extra money, or you can just pitch a tent, which we were cheap. So I was like, we'll just buy a tent. We'll just pitch out there. But you can walk on the old, 1940s, 50s runway. And so all this grass was growing between the cracks of the runway, and you would see these little birds. It was just a gorgeous thing. It was one of the last places where whooping cranes would nest. So it was kind of like super special in that area. But one of those barrier islands, unlike Matagorda Island. And so you could either go on the bay side, which was calm, and you can wade out in the water, look for redfish that way. Or if the tide was right or things were going, you could walk about a 2-mile down this trail to the beach. And imagine 30 miles of beach and you're the only person on it, right? And so you'd be on this beach, and sometimes we'd camp on the beach and be the only people camping on this beach for all night, right? And we would try to catch redfish and specks. And one time we caught like a 5-foot stingray. That was kind of dangerous because no one was around. If we got hurt, it would have been a real bad situation. But it was kind of this awesome experience. Anyway, so I'd always been sort of passionate about fishing at that time. And that was kind of a really cool time. So, and it was with my friend Keith and my friend Bob. And so Keith, Bob, and I would go out there, and then we would camp the night and then come back Sunday and then drive back.
What's the ratio between like the camping time and the fishing time?
Oh, we spent most of our time fishing.
Just fishing all day long.
Fishing all day long, yeah. And we would be exhausted. There were times where it was like dangerous because the bays in Texas are very shallow. You can actually walk out like a 1/4 mile and still only be just, thigh high. We'd be wading out for miles looking for fish, and we have to walk back 2 miles. And it's like, oh shit, I'm out of water. I'm going to get heat stroke.
No, you don't come from Texas, but I know that you have an affinity for Texas.
Oh, I love Texas. Yeah. There's something special about the way that people are there, et cetera. Regardless of your political affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that's the best part is if you sort of leave some of those political beliefs behind you, you realize that this is a wonderful time to be with these people.
And the landscape it really informs all this.
It's super flat and funky and weird, and it's just kind of awesome. Yeah. And so I remember when I was there, we were all traditionally fishing, and then I saw a couple guys that clearly had way more money than anyone else that wear the fancy stuff. They were fly fishing for redfish, which now is like the common way to, like, that's the way you want to catch redfish is with a fly rod, because that's the super fun way to do it. But back then it was like kind of new, we're looking around mid 90s is that time. Right. But I was like, huh. And so I started when I would go to the airport, and you go to the magazine section at the airport, and you see these funky, weird magazines there sometimes, like Guns and Ammo or whatever. And then you see the fishing stuff. And then I started seeing these saltwater fly fishing magazines, and I started getting into that. And I saw because everyone thinks of fly fishing for trout on a river, which is what it was sort of invented for in a lot of ways. It came from Scotland. as a lot of interesting, weird sports like golf come from. But it was interesting to see this stuff because suddenly I would see the saltwater stuff. And then I saw like bonefish was like, oh, right. And I realized like bonefish on a fly because of how easily they spook. And there's a reason for that. I'll get into the whole why fly fishing is better. But I also saw that like people were catching marlin on fly rods. And I was like, what
A marlin's a giant fish. It's
a giant fish.
Big dangerous fish.
Yeah. You were talking like 800 pounds, right? And then I was looking at it and they're like, oh, they literally do a bait and switch, right? So what they do is they'll put out a teaser, which they'll usually have like a mackerel or something without a hook, right? And they'll throw it out there and with a traditional rod and then reel it in to bring the marlin who wants to think of it. It's almost exactly like a cat with a cat toy. Just that's what it is, right?
Right.
I mean, that's how fish act. You know, it's funny because I remember at one point I had in Matagorda, I had what's called a golden spoon. It's kind of like a lure that kind of looks like a spoon, without the handle, but just the spoon part. And when you throw it in the water, it spins, right? And it flashes with all kinds of colors and brightness and stuff. And I was casting it and I was reeling it in and I saw a redfish chase it and it looked just like a cat chasing a cat toy, right? And I realized like, oh, right. And that's the instinct they have, right? They're hunting just like cats do, right? And so when the marlin, you throw the fish out there, the actual fish, and you reel it in. And then what you do is you cast right behind that teaser with your fly. And then the guy who has the teaser just yanks it. And then the fish, if you strip and you're like, oh, there it is, and they go for it, and that's what they do, right?
So you're saying this is a two-person team, essentially.
It's a two-person team, and it's literally a bait and switch. So that's what they do for those big fish and stuff. So I started like, and then a part of me was like, that's cheating. But it's not, and we'll get into that. It's actually
I didn't know this at all about fishing because that's real hunting.
That's real hard to do. You got a two-person coordination, get it right. Yeah, that's when I started to want to fly fish, right? And I started understanding that I didn't really have an interest in fly fishing before. It's like it's too much stuff involved. It just seemed complicated. Like I just didn't want to do it. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, that's next level fishing.
I think with any kind of obsession at all, like there's some sort of boundary layer that you pass through, like where you're like, beyond this point, I simply don't understand what this is. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I was like, okay, I want to do this, right? And as you know, with me, I tend to, when I get into something, I get really into it. My mother used to call it obsession. I call it passion.
These things are often intertwined.
But I also had a little bit of a fear that I would get totally wrapped up in this world, right? And that it would somehow be a problem for me to deal with that. And I, honestly speaking, I think it was because I used to get criticized for being obsessed about something. And I was nervous about that process. But what was great about it was that my wife, she encouraged me to do this because she knew it would make me happy, right? So what she did is she gave me, and this was, I want to say, God, it must have been like 7, 8+ years ago. It was a while ago. She gave me a gift certificate for fly fishing lessons. To a place called Bob Marriott's Fly Fishing in Long Beach, right? And it was an intro to fly fishing. And she's like, you've always wanted to do this. You should do it, right? And so I went along with Stephen Parker. Of course, you remember Stephen Parker.
Oh, I remember Steve, absolutely.
And so we were both wanted to do this. And I talked about doing it because I want to do this too. It's like, okay, let's go. So it's a full day of intro to fly fishing. And this is just the introduction. It's a full day that you go there because there is so much just to get to the entry level. And it's a little overwhelming when you go there, right? Because, like you go to a place, with your kid and like he wants to go fishing. You got to get a rod, a bang, boom, boom, cast, boom. It takes like 5 minutes to teach them how to do this, right? With fly fishing, it's not even close. I'll go a little bit into this. Like what is fly fishing and how is it different from traditional fishing, right? And so fly fishing, the big difference is that there is no weight on the line. The weight of the line is the fly line itself. So instead of having like a 2-ounce weight that's this big, it's a 2-ounce weight spread over 25
The surface
feet.
of the water. Yeah,
No, the
right.
surface of the line. So a fly line itself is usually about 100 feet. The first 20 to 30 feet is the part of the line that has the weight on it. But it's not, if you pick up the line, it's not like heavy. It's just, it's balanced for the whole system, right? Because what you got to do is you got to throw this line out there. And then the other one, you just go, whoosh, and then the big ball just goes boing, and it carries everything out. Here, you have to have a perfect cast so that the line follows this motion that then carries the rest of it out. Otherwise, it'll just not do anything. So the casting of that specific fly line is actually pretty complicated. You have to get it to gain its inertia and put the power of what it's doing into the fly rod. When that fly rod starts to bend, that is called loading it, right? So it's all about a back cast and a front cast, right? So then you remember River Runs Through It, they're doing donk, 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 right? Like a metronome. When the line is out in front of you and you do back, right? You want to stop it right around here, right? And you're actually don't use most people want to use their wrist, which is totally fine with a normal rod, but with fly lines, it's no. You lose all your energy. The fly line goes behind you, and the rod, as that line starts to go back, your rod starts to bend in that direction, right? If you put your line too low, your line goes down onto the ground and you've lost all the energy. So you have to have it at a very specific height. Your rod is like this and then has that bend. I'm sort of doing bend like this. And then you want that line to go perfectly straight behind you. And then all that energy that line has, it goes like this, right? And then that point, when you know that you have the energy to do that, you cast it forward like this, and then that rod will go bam and whip the whole thing forward. When you do that perfectly, the line will go forward out of the tip of your rod and create a loop. And so that loop unravels, and then it's perfectly straight in front of you. And if you do it poorly, your loop is very big. If you do it perfectly, your loop is like this small, and you're like whoosh, and very precise. So imagine the old way, it's like throwing a rock into the river, right? Shapang, and then you see like blump, and it falls in, and then you wait for the fish to show up. Or a lure, the lure itself can be the weight, because lures are heavy, right? But with flies are very light. That's the whole point, right? And so they don't make a splash. They don't make any noise. That's because you don't want to scare a trout or whatever else you're doing. It's all about being very delicate, right? So as you cast and that line unravels in that loop sort of unravels to a straight line, boop, boop, right? Imagine that loop slowly going onto the water and that it slowly unravels itself onto the water. And then when the fly lands at the end, there's no splash. It's just, it's just there. The problem is you have to be very, very precise about it. And the instinct to do, especially if you're a guy and a traditional fisherman, is to just toss it as hard as possible. And in fly fishing, if you toss it as hard as possible, everything goes to hell. And you get no distance out of it. You can get way more distance from a precision cast than you can from a strong cast. So just this idea of what's it all about? The whole idea is that it's a fly or a lure that basically has no weight. And it could be top surface, which is a floating fly, also known as a dry fly, or a sinking fly, or wet fly, depending what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be it's traditionally called a fly because that's what's used for trout, but it can be anything, right? So like this thing, right? This is a fly. This is not actually my fly. This is an owl fly, but that one just looks like a fish. But you can see that it's just made of very fine fibers, right? And there's a hook in there somewhere.
It's essentially like a teardrop shaped fuzzy thing with if you really squint, you can see the hook that's hidden inside there.
But this thing weighs nothing. But that's a pretty big one. That's what you're going to do to catch rooster fish or some big, maybe even a tarpon or something. It gets to the point where you get so into this technique that it's not just because you want to be stealthy. It's because can I catch X fish on a fly line, right? So it's like the extra bit of challenge that you're adding to yourself, because in most cases it's easier to catch things with traditional fishing, but when you add the complexity of fly fishing, then it's like you're challenging yourself to catch a fish on a fly rod.
What is the satisfaction difference between those two types of fishing?
Well, first of all, it's like I caught that on a fly line, so there's bragging rights, right? But also because in the other cases you have a heavier line, heavier situations. When you're doing it on a fly line, there's no weight to the point where you feel every nibble, every grain of sand. You can feel it in your fingers and in everything. So you're way closer to the situation, to the actual fish. When you feel a small, like a fish this big, you can feel it like it's a fish this big. Like
right.
you feel every little joint and everything that's going on.
It's an extension of your own nerve endings when you do this.
It's an extension, exactly. So that was the sort of basic part of like fly fishing. But then what I found out is like, okay, so this is where it gets ridiculously expensive. Okay, because you can get a regular rod and a reel, and you can put different types of line on there, et cetera, et cetera. With fly fishing, because of the way that you have that action, everything has to be balanced together, right? So they actually have class systems that they do in terms of measuring what type of fly line and fly rod and fly reel you need to have all combined. So a traditional trout fishing situation is usually done with what's called a 5-weight. So they have this thing called a weight system, right? And so a 5-weight, if you get a 5-weight rod, you need a 5-weight reel, and you need basically a 5-weight line. But the lines, because they have to make things complicated, are not always measured in weights, but they don't use grams they use something called grains. That's their weight system. It's called a grains. It's 100 grain, 150 grain. So it's a completely different weight system that was probably used in some medieval times that we somehow still use for fly fishing.
It's an imperial
right?
system problem, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
some crazy.
Exactly, right.
So you have all these. So you have 5 weights, right? And then if you need heavier ones for heavier fish, you go to like a 6 or 7 or 8, etc. And so they go up, or they can go down. If you're like looking for teeny little brook trout, you can go to a 4 or a 3 or a 2 weight, right? Teeny little stuff, a little panfish and stuff like that. So all of that's kind of out there, but basically for every one, you're going to have to get a whole new setup, and they're all expensive. It's all ridiculously expensive.
Do you have enough information going into this to know if you're investing in the right direction of fly fishing?
Well, they kind of tell you, like, what kind of fly fishing do you want to do? If you want to go out for trout, which is what most people want to try to do, is you get yourself a 5-weight setup, right? It's pretty straightforward. And so even as a beginner, you're looking at least $300 to $500 just to have that set up.
This is just the basic layout. This is like
basic layout.
Right, when you're playing a video game, you choose the fighter with the sword, and this is where you like it, and this is where your experience points go.
And it's at least $300 to $500 just for that, right? And in most cases, when you start getting into it, it's like you're now looking at $1,000 setup every time you get everything get up. Like every time you want to get a new rod and reel, and then you start to.
It's like starting again.
Oh yeah. So I have a 5-weight, I have 2 7-weights, and I have a 9-weight, and I'm probably looking to get an 11-weight before my trip. So I did this thing, and it was right before I was about to go on a trip. Karen and I were going to go on vacation. We were going to go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is gorgeous. Definitely recommend that place. And so I just took this basic class, and I didn't buy anything, but I knew how to cast, and I had the basic understanding of fly fishing. And so I booked a trip with a guide on the Snake River, right in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Nice guy, and he sent me. I was like, okay. So it gets me on the way you do these float. They're called a float trip for fly fishing. What you do is the guy takes his boat or his truck, and it drops a boat that is going to go down the river, and you float down the river for several miles. And basically he knows exactly. It's like over the course of 5 hours, we'll end up here, right? And so what they do is he parks his truck there and then leaves their keys in some specific place. And there's a whole service. It's like Uber for fly fishermen that takes their truck and drops it off at the pickup zone that 5 miles down the road, right? And so you get on this float, and then you're basically floating down the river for several miles, and they'll pack you a lunch if they're, or sometimes you have to bring your own lunch. And then you go fishing, and this is your guide for the day. So the first thing he did is he gets me on the boat, and then there's like a little, like a little island, kind of small island in the river. And we get off the boat, and he says, "I want you just to get on this island. We're just going to see how you can cast, so I get an idea of what we're able to do with you." And this is literally my first time on a river, and so I'm holding someone else's rod, and he's like, "Yeah, that's not." Because you want to do this? And he's like, okay. And I tried doing this, and then it's like, okay. And it's like, yeah, you got it out there. And it's like, oh, it snagged on something. He's like, no, you got a fish on there. It was literally my second cast. And I didn't know. Like, I was like, oh my God, And so I didn't realize that like in trout fishing, you can actually cast, you can catch 20 fish, even as a beginner. It's pretty interesting. So I started getting into it, and I got like really into it. Now, when I'm talking trout, like they're sometimes like this big. Most of them are like
so
this big.
5 inches, 4 inches.
Yeah, 5, 6 inches.
Yeah,
right. But it's not like, the kind you get at the store when you get a trout almondine. That's usually farm raised fish, right? So, and that's a big trout. Like that would be like a really nice big trout. But these are wild trout, and they were cutthroat trout, which is a native trout, a whole other section anyway. So I did that for a couple times. I did a couple of trips like that. Another big trip I went to Yellowstone, and I was literally, it's the most beautiful thing. I went on a hike and wade trip with this guide, and we were literally in the middle of Yellowstone, hiking between the buffaloes to this river. Casting into this river, catching cutthroat trout, and like wild bald eagles it was like the most American thing possible. There's like, bison, right? Bison, and then bald eagles, and like, oh look, there's some wolves up in the distance, and it's like, Jesus.
Your experience in America fishing is radically different, it seems, like from Greece.
In Greece, absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah. Actually, and in Greece, we were catching these teeny little panfish, which, by the way, were great. We got them and pan fried them, and they ate them, and they were delicious. But this is different. And in Texas, I was eating the fish I was catching for sure. But then when you go to fly fishing, it becomes more traditional. Fly fishermen tend to do what's called catch and release. It's about the catching and the releasing and stuff like that. And
it's more of a sport rather than
it's more of a sport, and it's not about the killing.
Sure.
Trout's delicious, redfish delicious. But also, if you're in the middle of the river in Yellowstone and you catch a trout, first of all, you're not supposed to keep cutthroat trout. But if I catch like a rainbow trout out there, it's going to get spoiled by the time I get it back.
Yeah, you got to eat it or forget it. Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I'm waiting in the middle of nowhere. So I'm going to carry around an ice cooler with me the whole time? No, it's not, right? So it doesn't really work that way.
Because I don't know if listeners know, but Wyoming is really big.
Really big. Yeah. Really big. And a lot of nothing in the middle.
A lot of nothing.
Yeah. It's the besides Alaska, I think it's the least dense state, or might be
I think that's true. Yeah. Like when I was driving through it, I don't think I saw another car on the road for
I think there's less than 500,000 people. I think there's 300,000 people of all of Wyoming, right? Which is kind of insane. And they have 2 senators, those little fuckers.
It's true. Most everything you're describing for fly fishing is like, you better be okay with bigness, distance, and a lot of time.
A lot of time. Yeah. And patience.
Patience, yeah.
Yeah, that is the number one thing with fly fishing is being patient, not being frustrated. If you're frustrated with fly fishing, you're just going to lose every time. Yep. And you're going to make mistakes, and you have to be patient with yourself about those mistakes, because if you start getting frustrated, it's done. You're done. Right. And then there's a lot of ways you can make a mistake. So every time you make a mistake, you have to say, okay, that's the mistake I made this time. Now I have to correct for that mistake and adjust, right?
Right. So very zen. It's a very zen thing.
Very zen thing. So that was sort of as much fly fishing. Literally, I did those 2 trips, and they were several years apart, but I didn't really do much fishing. And I didn't own any fly gear at that point either, right? And so it was around 2019, actually, I decided, I'm going to buy a fly setup. And I knew, based on that trip with Stephen Parker, that there was fishing in the surf that you can do here in California with fly rods. I didn't know much about it at all, but based on my experience in Texas, I loved fishing the surf because it was, I catch stuff in there, and I like saltwater fishing a lot too. So there is a fly shop here in the valley called Fisherman's Spot. And I went there and I told them kind of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to look at. And they set me up with like, okay, if you're going to go to this, here's a 7-weight setup. You're going to need heavier than a 5-weight setup. And you want to, and it's only slightly heavier, but it makes a difference. And he goes, this is a good setup for you because you can do several things. 7 weight's pretty good in California because you can do several things with it. You can fish the surf. You can also fish for bass and for carp, which I was also sort of interested in. And I found out from the guys at the flower shop, there are big carp. And by the way, you can catch them in the LA River just over there.
Oh,
I'm
right.
like,
Yeah,
wait,
that's
what?
when people go fishing in the LA River.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
wild, yeah. Because usually,
Yes.
for people that are not from Los Angeles, when you think of the LA River, you're normally thinking of
You just think of this giant concrete basin that's dry and nothing's in it. But there are actually portions of the LA River that actually have quite a bit of water. And in that water, there are carp. Unfortunately, this used to be a secret. It's not really a secret anymore. But people still do stuff. The problem with Los Angeles, and this is very interesting, so we'll get into this. The problem with Los Angeles is that it's a huge city, as we all know. And so even in a huge city, there might be a few fly fishermen, but if someone finds something cool in Los Angeles and puts it up on Instagram, it's fucked immediately.
it's devastated.
Right. It's devastated. Right. Because, you'll have 200 people go to that one spot. Right.
Right.
And that's because that's not that many fly fishermen, but that's a lot for one spot. So that's why it's called burning a spot. And that becomes very big deal. If you burn spots, people not only people get pissed at you for burning spots. Like you get hated on by other fishermen, and then everyone's like, and that's this big drama behind it. Which there is drama behind fly fishing, like serious drama. Which
For as zen as the experience can be, like there's
and there's
productive.
rivalries and all kinds of stuff going on. So anyway, I started to go to the surf and I started to say, okay, I'm going to learn how to go on the surf. And I realized very quickly that surf had several other problems, much harder problems that I was dealing with. Most of the time when you're going for trout or other things, even bass, stuff like that, you use what's called a floating line. So the line actually floats on the surface of the water, right? And in front of the fly line is usually opaque and you can see it and it's not like a traditional thing. In front of the fly line, you tie what's called a leader, and it's different from the other ways, but the leader is the part of the line that is the transparent monofilament or fluorocarbon now if you're super fancy. And that's the portion of the line that's actually the thing that looks like a traditional fly line or fishing line. And that usually is anywhere between 9 to 10 feet beyond your fly line, right? And it can be shorter or longer. And it's also tapered. So the part that's right next to the fly line is the heavier one, and it gets thinner and thinner as you go down.
So it's like a very thin thread by the time it gets.
By the time it gets down. And so there's different classes of how thin that line is. And if you're in trout fishing, they measure it by the actual diameter. And there's the diameter is 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x. 5x, those more x's is the smaller it gets.
Oh, I
right?
see. Okay,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily measured in the traditional way of measuring it is how many pounds of test can it have, right? But in fly fishing, they're mostly concerned about the diameter of it in terms of what the fish can see. But anyway, leader is the part in front of it. So for the surf, you don't want a floating line. You have to have that straight line between you and that thing so that when you're feeling the line, and by the way, your rod is parallel to everything. So everything's in a straight line. So you need to feel that fly. Because the minute something touches that fly, you have to have an immediate connection with it to set the hook, right? So you have to have that complete parallel thing. Now, if you've been to the surf in California, if you have a floating line and you dump it on a bunch of waves, that line's going everywhere.
Yeah, tossed every place. Yeah, sure.
Tossed everywhere. So you have what's called a sinking line. So the line actually sinks on that one. And you have the special line that goes into the waves and then sinks immediately and sort of makes contact with the sand, and it creates this full line. So that when you're it's called stripping, right? You strip the line in, and you're doing it by hand. You don't do it with a reel, right? Because everything has to be out of the reel that you're going to cast. It's kind of so you have this bunch of line on the ground or in a stripping basket that you have in your lap that you toss it out there, and then it tosses all that line, and then you strip the line back in, and then boom, you catch the fish that way. So like I said, it's completely different from regular fishing. But in the surf, you're looking for tends to be more blind casting, meaning you're casting where you think the fish are going to be.
Right.
Generally speaking. And so I started going into the surf and started casting into the surf. And it was really hard. It took me 6 months before I caught my first fish. And I was going like every other weekend, right?
Wow.
To go try to do this.
Yeah, that's patience. That's patience.
And I realized like, it's okay. Because what I was doing, even when I wasn't catching fish, here's what the deal is. I was on the beach at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I'm going through the process of learning slowly, and enjoying it. And it didn't matter if I'm catching any fish. It really doesn't matter. I can fish. Getting skunked, which is meaning you don't catch anything, right, is still just fine. Like it's just fine, because that experience of just sitting there on the water and casting, and there's so much you can do beyond catching fish that it's a wonderful experience. So I didn't mind.
From when you were talking about like fishing with your dad for, with the giant fish that we were talking about,
right?
Like so much of what so much of what it seems to be about is like it's not just the fishing portion, it's the entire experience leading up to it as well, and like and being in the environment and traversing the environment and like experiencing all the little micro details of wading a mile out in 2 feet worth of water and meeting these guys. I mean, just like all that stuff before you even cast is the fishing. Right. That's all. That's the experience.
And it gets even more so. Like I could actually be doing fishing stuff right now, like tying flies or making leaders or redoing. Like there's always something to do, even if I'm not in the water. Like I said, remember, like I knew nothing about fly fishing, and I was catching like 20 fish in Wyoming, right? And then I went into the surf, and I knew more. And it took me 6 months before I caught my first fish, right?
Right.
I sort of joked about it. It's like learning how to play the French horn in a hurricane, right? It's like it's really hard, right? There's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm casting this teeny little fly. Here's like a traditional surf fly. It's like this is called a beach bug, right? It's not that big, and it weighs nothing. And I have to cast it perfectly straight into an exact location over, 4 foot waves.
Sure.
Right. And then it's like, trying to cast into a washing machine. It's really hard. So, but I started catching these little things called surf perch, and I caught one corbina, which I'm going to get into, which is a very special fish, and by accident, by the way. But I started seeing the corbina, and this is in the summer of 2020, and this is during the pandemic, right? So the pandemic hit, and this was like, this is what I can do, right? Like we all were looking for something to do in the pandemic,
right?
And this was perfect timing. Like I just started getting into fly fishing. I'm like, I can go to the beach.
It's a perfect fit. Exactly.
Right.
It's a perfect fit.
So I can do this. Right. And I started to get into it like that. And I caught a corbina, and remember I was talking about patience. So I was having slightly more success, but also it was getting harder. And so I was like, I realized I reached a wall of what I could do on my own. And I was starting to develop what I later found out to be bad habits. And so this was the problem. And so I didn't know where to go. So I looked on there was Facebook groups on it, and I found this Facebook group called, very specific, just like you were saying. It was like California fly fishing in the surf.
Oh yeah, that's amazing too.
Right?
Like that. Yeah, this is what's really fascinating to me is like the specificity of this, like the granular nature of this particular project is like, it seems infinite. Like it's like you can just keep going and going and going into it, and there's always more little weird details.
So a couple things, and I found out later that there's a lot of very, very talented fly fishermen. And you learn about, I mean, I'm being serious as like the all-stars of fly fishing, like the Michael Jordans of fly fishing and
Right.
all those guys, right? And there's a lot of them that kind of like live in California, right? And turns out that there's big rivalries between them in terms of who knows more, who has better reputation,
Right.
who's burning spots, who's posting too many things on Instagram and is very full of themselves, like literally this, right? And so it was funny because I was talking about this with my friend Andy, who I'll tell you about him in a second, but he was like, this is like Real Housewives, but like with real fly fishermen of Southern California. We were thinking about making like real fly fishermen of Southern California and like this whole like, oh man, that guy does this, or oh man, this guy's whatever. But I was basically saying I kind of reached a wall, and I went onto this group, right? And I said I kind of reached a wall, and I put out this sort of message, and it was a very heartfelt message about like how amazing this thing is and how it's been so wonderful during the pandemic, but like I need something to get me to the next level. Right after that message came up, I got a DM on Facebook from this guy named Al Q, right? And he just said, call me, and gave me a phone number.
Oh my God. It's like All the President's Men.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Meet me in a parking garage.
And so I said, okay. So I called this guy, and he's on the phone, super nice guy, right? Turns out Al Q is sort of like, Q is for Quattrochi. He's a Sicilian American, right? Mm-hmm. And grew up in Brooklyn. I believe it was Jamaica Bay, I think is where he was. And got into fishing a lot when he was a kid, like traditional stuff. And I actually done a podcast with him, believe it or not, for CG Garage, because I try to make it relevant. But he is a graphic designer, a very, very good graphic designer, has his own company. Which is fantastic. I think it's
how did that interview go? So you're like, okay, so we both love fishing, so let's talk about that, and then cap it with graphic design.
I threw in some CG stuff, but it was interesting because like I've known Al for a while, and he and I have become good friends. Right. But he was telling me about his background in computer graphics and how he got involved in graphic design. But turns out he went to Art Center. That's where, and he was one of the first classes ever to use computers at Art Center. And they didn't have anyone to teach anyone there at Art Center how to use computers. So they hired a couple of guys from JPL to teach them how to do stuff.
Wow.
And one of the guys was Jim Blinn.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, famous. Yes.
Yeah. Very famous Jim Blinn, who's in, anyway, so I know this, I'm talking about fishing, but anyway, Al learned computer graphics from Jim Blinn, which is like, what the hell, and so suddenly like Al and I had more than fishing going on. We could talk about Jim Blinn. But anyway, Al told me he would help me. And I said, okay, cool. Well, I would love to hire you as a guide. And he goes, don't need to hire me. Let's meet at this place and I can tell you some stuff. And so Al is basically my mentor, but he is definitely my mentor. But he is extremely good fisherman. Mm-hmm. He is very, he will yell at you for doing things the wrong way. Uh-huh. He is, when you're talking about super specific, like so specific that you're like, okay, because I know in fly fishing, you have to be very, very good and precise, but you don't know if like, is Al being a little too anal about this, or is this really necessary? But he I learned so much from him. It's so much.
Can you
right?
do you imagine a future in which you become a mentor for someone else?
Yeah, of course. That's what you should be. Mm-hmm. That's the way everything should be in life. Is you learn from an amazing person and then you pay it forward. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely would want to. It's an honor, honestly. He learned from Lefty Craig, there's fantastic names.
When are you going to get a great nickname like Lefty Craig?
Lefty Craig, yeah, or Al Q,
Al Q,
or Flip Pallet. Those are
my God.
These are all the famous fly fishermen in the world. They all have these great names. But yeah, he learned from Lefty, right? And so that's kind of a big deal. And so I learned a lot from Al, and Al was sort of, the problem Al had in some cases is some of the people out there learned from Al and then took all the credit, and Al is a little bit more
That's
quiet and reserved, right?
Right.
Or not quiet and reserved. He's definitely not reserved, but he's definitely less public about stuff that he,
Right.
So he tends to be a little bit more like in the loop, right?
Well, and that sort of fits in with the vibe, the fly fishing vibe of like don't burn
Burn spots. Don't
exactly.
yeah.
Right. It's
keep
all,
things on the DL, and
Right,
et cetera, and don't try to be super like.
Is it like, is there like, because I know like when like Anne talks about, Anne loves camping, and but she's like, yeah, there's camping and then there's glamping.
Right.
Is there the glamping version of fly fishing where you just like, oh, this guy's doing?
No, you kind of like, if you're fly fishing, you can't half-ass it, unfortunately. I mean, you can get really good, but at the minimum is there's no glamping.
Right. Yeah. Right.
At the minimum, you're still camping.
Right. Yeah. It's still
because
intense.
you can't. Yeah.
Everything's too expensive. It takes too much time, and like
takes
you
too
have
much
too much
time.
focus.
You can't. Yeah. So you can be very good, but and the thing is, like there are the rich guys that go fly fishing once or twice a year and buy all the expensive equipment, but then they're really just relying on the guide to just put them right there where they need to be, right?
Yeah, it's like the guys that climb Mount Everest. And
that would be glamping. That would be
Sherpa
glamping.
that climbed it and they took you along, right? It's the glamping.
And it's expensive and stuff like that. But otherwise it's more complicated. So anyway, the thing that sort of had it off is that there is this thing called the corbina, and this is a very special fish that's only available in California, and it's a very hard fish to catch.
Now I can before you start in, I can tell you that this part of I know this part of the story is important because I remember there is, if you look up any word on Google, it'll tell you like the usage of that word like in a little graph from like the 1900s, and it'll see like, oh, this really picks up speed in the 1920s and whatever. If you were to track just Martini Giant, the word corbina, like you'd see this mega spike. And I would be like,
Corbina is a big spike in Martini Giant.
I remember thinking, like I've never heard of a corbina before, and now I hear about it all the time as this very magical fish. Like this was a big journey for you that you embarked on. And like, I mean, it didn't interrupt the podcast, but I was like, I don't think there's a film podcast in the world that talks about corbina as much as this.
No, and it's. I mean, literally right now we're at the peak of corbina season. I should have gone fishing today. I didn't. I remember I told you I was going to go shark fishing, so that would have taken over. But I didn't go today because Karen was sick, and I need to know if I need to go to the pharmacy, pick up medication. I was like, I didn't want to be out corbina fishing right now, but I am going tomorrow. So, so what is so special about this fish? It is similar to a bonefish in the sense about the same size and stuff like that, and the way you do it, but they are an interesting fish. They don't have a swim bladder, so they stay low to the ground. Right?
What is a swim bladder?
So fish have a bladder in them that can either take in air or release air, and that's what sets their buoyancy of how high they are in the water.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right?
That's wild.
So that's what keeps them floating at a specific distance, and so it's kind of like a submarine where they like when they go lower, they release air, or they have less air and they go up. So that's their swim bladder. That's how it works. Bottom feeding fish, like a catfish or flounder or things like that, they don't have a swim bladder, so that they're just on the bottom, right? And so this one doesn't have a swim bladder either, but it's not like a flounder that just sort of sits there on the sand and then waits, or a halibut or whatever, it sits on the bottom and waits. It actually still looks like a traditional fish. In fact, its body, if I cut a corbina in, its body's kind of like a diamond, right?
shape,
right? So the stomach is here, and then it's kind of like that. But it also has two very wide. Its side fins are very wide, right? And there's a reason for that. What these things do in the summer. In the surf in California, especially if you're on a very flat beach, the beach where the waves break further out and then they continue to have smaller breaks as you come in, and you see these things. And the water only gets like maybe a foot in those small breaks, only gets a foot or so high. The Corbina come in with those little ripple waves, and they're looking for sand crabs. The little sand, or also called mole crabs, which are like those little sand fleas that you dig in the sand. You see them; they look like little fleas.
Yeah,
right.
They'll jump.
They're all
out,
over the beaches everywhere. Yeah. But in the summer, there's a lot of them. And what the Corbina do is they ride these waves in very, very skinny water. They ride these waves, and then they come in looking for the sand crabs, and they go as high as possible where they can get the better sand crabs, right?
Wow.
So they ride these waves in, and they use their little side. It's like surfing. They're like surfing on these waves, and then they turn around, and then they go back. And you can see them usually on their go back where their backs are out of the water. Like they're going in such skinny water, they practically
it's right at the lip of the wave as they
practically beach themselves. But they're just so good at this thing, right? But because they're doing this, and similar to the bonefish that I was describing earlier, they actually get into like the danger zone, right? So like, oh, they got to get out there because there's a fish coming after them, or a bird coming after them, or whatever is going on. Right. So this is a special fish to catch as well. So what you're doing is you stand back on the sand. You don't want to spook them, very similar to things. And fly rods are perfect for this thing. And you deliver flies that are tied like little sand crabs. They're usually called, the one that I tie is called a merkin, believe it or not. It looks like a little merkin. But if it's got these little shapes, and it's got it's got the little fibers on it. And the idea is when it lands in the sand and you pull it, you're stripping it in, it just looks like a little bubble in the sand, and it looks just like a sand crab kind of moving along under the sand surface. Right. And when a Corbina sees that, it'll hook into, and if you cast it perfectly and you get there, it'll grab it, and then it's a fight because they're big fighters and they take off, and a lot of fun to catch. But the challenge is catching one. Like if you catch like 5 in a year, that's a 5 to 10 in a year.
Well, I mean, this is happening right on the razor's edge of the surf. Like this is like right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like
and so you're waiting for this specific times. And in fact, today or tomorrow is like what's called the magic window of time, and it's perfect. So what's going on right now is we're in a new moon phase, right? So it's dark at night, right? We also have strong tides because it's new moon, right? New moons and full moons are the strongest tides. And so what's going to happen is at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's actually at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's the lowest tide tomorrow, which means those Corbina have been pushed out far, right? And then the tide's going to start coming in hard, right? These fish have been pushed out for 6 hours. They haven't been able to eat for 6 hours.
They're starving.
They're hungry, right? Yeah. And so they're going to come in hard and fast right around 7:30.
The buffet is open.
7:30 to 9 is that magic window. You're coming in fast for sand crabs.
Yeah.
And so you have to be there at the right moment looking for these fish coming in, and then that's your golden moment to catch them.
Do birds know this also? Do birds know what the timing? Yeah.
But they're not. Yeah, they're not going to go after them right away. So the Corbina and the shallows are not super vulnerable, except for maybe a couple of birds, maybe some pelicans. But they might be attacked by some halibut. Halibut can get big or not. There's also leopard sharks out there, but that's about it. Well, probably their biggest threat are sea lions, but around the surf area, they're in pretty good shape. But anyway, this is what you're doing. And the Corbina so that's the fish I want to catch, right? And then Al is like one of the big experts on catching Corbina. In fact, he wrote a book during the pandemic called Corbina Diaries.
That's amazing. That's great.
And so that's sort of how I learned that. But besides that, I started to really expand on my fly fishing, right? Because I knew it's like, okay, now I've done that. I figured out the surf thing. I do that. And then I started to tie, right? Tying my own flies and understanding that. And it became this thing, right? Where like I had a bare hook and a bunch of materials, and I tied this thing, and I used that thing that I tied yesterday, tied it onto my leader, and the thing that I created fooled a fish, and I caught this fish. So you had this entire cycle that you've done through.
Right. It's this is because of what you did from the ground up.
Everything you've done went down there, right? And it was interesting to think about what that means, and I think it was Chris Blythe, actually, believe me. He asked me what's so appealing about tying flies. And I started to think about it. It's like, it was not dissimilar from CG of making a shader. It's like, you're looking at what you're trying to imitate. I'm trying to imitate a sand crab. I'm trying to imitate a crayfish. I'm trying to imitate this, right? And you find the materials to make that happen. And it's not just how it looks, but it's how it moves, and it's how it does this and how it does that. And what size hook you use and what materials you use, and finding different things. And then there's tons of different ways of tying them. And so most of the time when you tie a fly, it's a specific fly, the way you tie it is called a recipe. It's literally called a recipe, right? So you have all these different things. So it just became obsessed about making these flies, and it just became something I can do all the time, right? Like if I'm not fishing, I can tie a fly for when I'm going to fish, and I can plan about where I'm going to go, right? So like next year, like in June, I'm going to go on a big trip, right? It's going to be in Belize. It's going to be a week of fishing in Belize.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And it's not cheap. Right.
Sure.
And I'm going with Al and a bunch of other old white men. And we are going to go fishing, and I'm excited about it. This is the goal, the three big fish you want to catch on the fly rod for tropical saltwater, right? Bonefish, I mentioned earlier, and then a permit and a tarpon. And if you can catch all three in one day, that's called a grand slam. Very hard to do.
That's neat. Yeah.
Right. And they're very challenging. They each have their own things. But in that year, right, there's going to be a ton of prep that I'm going to have to do. Right. So,
well, I think there must be research on just what the situation is.
Research on all kinds of stuff, right? I'm going to have to buy an 11 weight for that tarpon, right? Because I have a 9 weight that probably will work for permanent. I have a 7 weight, obviously that's going to work for the bonefish. I'm going to have to buy new fly lines for tropical situations and all kinds of stuff, right? But at the same time, like Al is taking us fly casting lessons, like on every other week, so that we make sure that we're good for those conditions and not wasting our time with shitty casts and not catching fish. Yeah. Right. So that, the money's
You want to be
worth
sharp.
it.
You want to be sharp.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, that's another thing I do a lot when I'm not fishing is I cast. I go to the baseball field here and I walk down there and I cast like every other day.
Just
like
build the muscle memory.
Throws.
Right.
It's like shooting free throws, right?
Right. Sure.
So I learned, and there's a lot, I'm talking about traditional cast, but then there's Belgian cast, there's side cast, there's, double hauls, there's all kinds of stuff that you can practice and do things, roll casts, all kinds of different ways of casting that you can learn to do that. So again, like I said, this is like a complete rabbit hole. This is not just throwing out something. There's so many different things to learn.
Well, because there's plenty of things that people can talk about where it's like, someone who whatever, like I've met mechanics who don't really drive that much. There's people just get into specific aspects of,
and there's people who are really good at tying flies and don't fly fish that much.
Yeah, this is what I was going to ask. I was just like, is this a universal experience for is there just a thing that they do, and I just want to tie flies, and that's my experience?
No, so Al is kind of unique in that way. He is an amazing fly tyer. He's an amazing caster. He's a real tough teacher.
Good. Yes.
He's not always patient with his students, but that's okay with me. I don't care. Like it's okay. He can yell at me because that's how I'm going to get better. And he has a great friend who I also his name's Jim Solomon, who's also an amazing casting instructor. And he's been teaching me stuff. So I mean, and I'm not kidding you. I'm like, it's like when I'm learning from like Al Q and Jim Solomon how to cast, it's like learning how to shoot free throws from Scottie Pippen. Like
sure. Right.
I'm very lucky.
Yeah.
Very lucky that these guys are helping me out.
Is California is this
no. Florida, the saltwater fly fishing is all Florida. Those are where all the big fly guys are.
Right.
But there is a sort of this strange little West Coast thing that's going on. So like for example, there's a there's a famous magazine for saltwater fly fishing called Tail Magazine, and Al is the West Coast representative or correspondent for.
Oh my God, that's
magazine.
wild.
Yeah.
Like I can see this developing into sort of like an East Coast, West Coast.
Totally.
Like suddenly there's fishing gangs.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing.
So the other thing, like for example, like if you're like West Coast, like one of the things you'll get into is go fly fishing down in Baja. In Baja, there's something called a rooster fish. It's like amazing fish to catch. It's also a well sought off prize fish. It's like a lot of people have on their bucket list of fish to catch. But yeah, so like learning from Al has been this experience and it's this amazing thing. So another thing that was interesting is because I talk about it on the podcast all the time, this is sort of, so a few things that have happened that are pretty hilarious. I was fly fishing in Malibu and, and I was, some guy came up to me who was in a surfing outfit or whatever, and he had a surfboard, and he looks at me and goes, "Excuse me, are you Chris Nichols?" He says, "I heard you talking about fly fishing on the podcast." And I thought it was like the only guy I've ever seen fly fishing in Malibu, so it's got to be Chris Nichols. So it's funny.
That's amazing.
So that was funny. But another thing that happened is that someone else who listened to the podcast, who's a CG guy, reached out to me about, hey, I'd love to, I've listened to CG Garage, but I really was, I'm from Michigan. It was traditional fishing. I wanted to get into fly fishing. I'd love to learn more. And so I helped him out the same way that someone helped me out, right? And I said, go to this, to the fishing spot. You can get set up there. And then, maybe you and I can meet on the surf and whatever. So he did that. And then his name is Andy, and Andy and I became actually pretty close friends, and we go do a lot of fishing together, right? And now Andy's gotten really good too, right, over the years. It's been several years we've been fishing together, and so we've been doing a bunch of things. So Andy's actually going to come on this Belize trip as well. So that's
awesome. That's really great. Yeah.
So developing those friendships and helping these things out has been really cool. And so that as that happened, we're starting to get Isaac into fly fishing too.
Nice. Yes.
So Isaac's starting to get into fly fishing, and so this is the thing. And then when you find someone you're like, I'm thinking about interesting in fishing, then people like me and Andy were like, oh yeah, we're gonna get you into it. But make sure to start saving now.
That's right.
Because it's gonna be crazy town, right? So that's the other thing. And then look, so I mentioned this Belize trip, practicing your casting, figuring out what flies you're gonna tie over the next year to make sure you have a full fly box for all the different situations. And
Right.
all of that becomes a passionate thing.
I mean, I'm sure that people have they have pride in their selections of flies that they made. These are very, very special.
Oh yes. So there's but most flies you're doing a specific pattern, right? And so it's you rarely do you invent a fly. Sometimes you can,
right?
Or you can do variations. But I mean, not everyone's like, this is my special fly, but it's mostly based on a specific fly, and you might tie variations of that thing or whatever.
But you're trying to get it as close to the perfect version of that as possible. Like there's an agreed upon version that this is the right one, right?
Now, here's the thing. Most flies will work. Right?
They're fish. They're not that bright.
The secret is the quality of the fly is mostly for you.
Yeah.
Or the people you're showing it to. Right?
It's the intensity of the focus that's represented in the thing. Yeah. Of course,
Yeah.
Right.
But there are reasons. There are certain things you want to do. Like, for example, let's take this fly. Like there is a very slight weight on the bottom here called a tungsten. And that's just enough to make this thing sink.
Oh, I see. Right.
Because you need this to get to the bottom, right? So it's not going to make a huge splash. And sometimes you use different kinds of weight, but you need that thing. But this is tied right now. That weight is tied on the bottom end of the hook, so that when it falls, the hook is up and doesn't get caught in the sand. Otherwise,
I see. It doesn't drag. Right.
Doesn't drag. So this is the way it's meant to ride.
What I'm looking at is actually pretty incredible because, like, at first the camera was out of focus, and I was like, "Well, it looks exactly like a fish when it's out of focus." And then it snapped into focus for a second. I was like, "That still looks exactly like a fish." Like it's really pretty amazing. It looked like anything. Like it has this spray of sort of spotted tail feathers, more or less.
Yep.
But it
Those
also
are
has
rooster
these
feathers.
Dangling legs. Like it has
Yep.
these little
Little double
feathery
lower legs, and then on the top, it's using squirrel tail hair.
Where do you get the materials to construct this
Oh,
stuff?
I have a whole box of materials. And there's tons. Let's just put it this way: fly tying is not a vegan sport.
Right.
I use squirrel tail, bucktail for deer tails. Lots of different kinds of feathers. Obviously, feathers are very common in there. Rooster feathers are very common. In the old days, it's like there was like exotic birds that were used. Obviously that's not kind of cool to do that anymore. Sure. These days there's a lot of synthetic materials as well that you use, different kinds of fibers and things like that. So I have a huge box just filled with stuff, right? And it's a lot of fun picking out the right materials to what you need to do and how to get this all hooked up.
Because like, do you know the game Warhammer 40,000?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so a lot of my friends play. It's in the realm of like Dungeons and Dragons and that whole sort of zone of things. But this is like the very particular, very specific miniatures-based tactical game, like with physical little guys that you move around and stuff like this. And when I was watching one of your videos of fly tying, it was almost identical to watching another friend's videos of painting miniatures.
Right.
Like the unbelievable commitment to detail and the tightness of what is happening and the sort of like the how focused their mind is to the point where like the rest of the world isn't really present. Like it's just you're in this special little zone. And that when I watch the videos in both cases, like I don't know anything about what is happening. Like I'm just like I'm as layman as I can get in both cases. Right. But the zone, like the flow state of the experience is very transferable. Yeah. Like I'm watching this thing and I can literally just have it on and know that it's happening and like it calms me down.
Yes.
Like
and there are fabulous tie flying YouTube videos. I've done a couple myself, but I've only done like 2 or 3.
Well,
but
they're cool.
There are channels and channels and channels of this stuff, right? And there's some good ones out there. There's a guy I think his channel is called Fishing the Ozarks, which is a lot of fun. If you need to sit down and chill,
this is it.
It's it, right? It's kind of like, you remember when we used to watch, Bob Ross, right? It's kind of a little bit like,
right?
Except it some of it's really beautiful, and like some of these fish and these patterns that are tying are just gorgeous, right?
Yeah, just watching this thing evolve right in front of your eyes.
Yeah,
it's really wild.
It's really kind of a wonderful experience, and then tying just the whole journey, right? Like I am going to spend the next year tying flies for next year, right?
For Belize.
For Belize. And then so that process of anticipation. So like the journey to Belize starts now. It's not like, I'll see you in a year. No. You know? And that's a wonderful thing, right? That's sort of so
not to mention it's Belize, it's like there's the entire component of this other beautiful experience going on.
Right.
Like being there and experiencing this entire other part of the world as the context for this other thing that you're in love with, know, like, so like when you say it's like rabbit hole after rabbit hole, like it actually, like it carries you through so many different spheres of interest and sort of beauty, and everything seems to be locked together in that flow state Zen experience. Like every aspect of it. That's the if you're gonna draw the Venn diagram of it, like all these elements all center on this one sort of patience of mind, and being in the moment, experiencing the thing, right? And just travel through that all the time.
So I know I've gone a little long, but I think this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to end this story. It's going to be a long story, which will be fine, but it'll wrap around towards what we started at the beginning, because I was supposed to go shark fishing today, right? And I'm going to explain that process of how I got into this and what happened, because I've done it in the past, and this was supposed to be my second big trip that I was going to go on.
I love it.
But
Please
I didn't
go.
have
Yes.
it, right? So how did I get into this shark fishing, and what is this all about? So because I was learning from Al in those early days, and I was doing stuff, and I was like, anything I can learn from, right? I got his book, et cetera, et cetera. But then I also saw that he was on another fly fishing podcast, which is now done. I believe they don't have it anymore, but what's called the Barbless podcast or something like that. And he was on that podcast talking about fly fishing for Corbina and what that's all about, et cetera. It was a great episode. And the guy who hosted that podcast is also a very well-known fly fisherman. Of course, because he's a well-known fly fisherman, he has to have an awesome name. So his name is Conway Bowman.
Oh my God. This is like better than CB radio handles.
Isn't it amazing? Like, Chris Nichols is never going to be a famous fly
It's
fisherman.
never going to catch, dude. Yeah,
Never going to work,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Because I don't have a name like Conway Bowman, right? But anyway, Conway is very Southern California guy. Grew up in San Diego, still lives in San Diego, and et cetera, et cetera. So I started listening to his podcast after I listened to Al Q's podcast, and one of the episodes was him and his wife talking about just they're the hosts of the podcast. His wife is also on there, but talking about what he is known for, which is fly fishing for mako sharks, and this is very specialized and a big deal, right? So I started, and how he got into it, right? So he's one of the guys. He's not the guy. There's other people who sort of first did it, but he's one of the guys. One of the guys who's kind of made this a famous thing that you can do. Like, people now like, oh, I want to do that, and they'll travel from around the world to go to San Diego to catch, those things. Although there's plenty of people to do it. Conway is one of the top guys to do it, right? So he's friends with Al, so I got introduced to Conway through Al, booked the trip, and this happened a couple years ago. And I did it with both Andy, who I mentioned earlier, and Andy's friend Alex, who I used to fish with a lot, but unfortunately Alex has moved back to Michigan, so we don't see Alex as much. But so it was the three of us. We hooked up. We're going to have on this trip with Conway. So, what is a mako shark? And this is a kind of a big deal. So, mako sharks are one of the top predators, the top sharks out there. There's several big top predator sharks out there. Obviously we all know the great white sharks, and then there's also tiger sharks, bull sharks. But mako sharks are pretty special. They're not dissimilar from a great white shark. They don't quite get as big as great whites. They get pretty big, though. They can get 12, 16 feet long. They can get pretty huge. They can get up to 1,000 pounds. But great white sharks tend to stay near coasts. That's where they hunt, right?
But the mako's a deep water, like way out
right.
there
So they're
fish, yeah.
pelagic.
Yeah.
When it's
Pelagic.
a deep water, when you're a deep water fish, like tuna, right? Things like that. They're called pelagic fish, right?
Okay.
And so makos are pelagic, and so they hunt things like marlin and tuna. And in order to hunt those fish, you have to be very fast,
Right.
right? Because those fish are fast. It's all about speed. That's there's nothing to hide behind in the open ocean,
Right.
right? So your only defense is speed, or
So
don't-
the
either
highlights of what
fast
you're
enough to catch something or fast enough to get away from something.
Exactly, man. Because and the thing is, like, when you start saying, like, okay, so the speed, 1,000 pounds shark, like, this doesn't sound like a non-dangerous sport. This sounds like,
it's not
yeah,
non-dangerous
this is very
at all,
serious.
right?
Right.
Right. So these fish are very, very fast, and that's the whole point of them. So what I learned on the podcast is the whole point of catching these fish is that if you hook into one, remember I said a bonefish will go 30 miles an hour. These things will go 60 miles an hour,
Oh my
up to
God.
60 miles an
Wow.
hour, right?
Wow.
And they also are very athletic. So they will breach the water, and they can jump up to 20 feet out of the water.
Oh my
right?
God.
So you see like a 200-pound freaking fish jumping 20 feet out of the water. It's quite spectacular. Yeah. Now, they generally do this to catch birds out of the water.
Just pluck birds from the sky.
Yep.
Yeah, that's very serious.
They're
serious
pretty
fish.
right, but they can. they can do this kind of stuff. So, so it was, anyway, it's pretty exciting. So I've sort of was excited about doing this and sort of figuring out how it's going to be done. So, the way this happens, right? You have to have patience, right? You're looking for a very specific shark in a big, wide open ocean. You have to wait and wait and wait for this to happen. So what you do is, his boat is, I don't know, it's not that big a boat, maybe 28 feet, right? Maybe 32 feet. It's a small boat. Pretty much can only hold the 4 of us, the guide and the 3 of us. That was the maximum occupancy of this boat. And he has a very specific fly rod for these that are custom made for these sharks, right? Essentially, it's like a 20 weight, as you remember the weight size, right?
It's got to be as strong as hell.
And he's custom made different fly lines, and obviously the as Al was saying, it's like, well, how far do you have to cast? And someone's like, it's like, you don't have to cast very far because they'll come right up to the boat. But the fly is like half a chicken, it's like a big thing, right?
Wow.
And so and on top of that, the end of the line, the end of the is made of steel because, for obvious reasons, you have a steel wire because
it'll snap otherwise.
Right off.
Right.
These things have razor blade teeth going on.
Right.
And so it's, so first things he does is he's like, has you practice casting these big
Chickens.
Things that are hard, right, to cast. Right. But as is traditional, in fly fishing, distance is important to cast. If you cast a good distance, 60 to 80 feet, that's a really good distance, right? If you can cast that far. You're never going to cast that far with this line and this setup. You can cast like 20, 30 feet, which is perfectly fine. That's not a problem, right? But accuracy, you have to be right there where it casts, right? Because it's going to be a bait and switch situation, like I was talking about earlier. So, so what's going on at this point is you take the boat out. Maybe you go about 6 or 7 miles out into the water, open water, right? And the coast of California in this area it gets deeper and deeper, and you get to an edge at about 6 or 7 miles where it's the water depth is about 200 feet, and then it's a cliff to 2,000 feet of depth.
Oh wow!
Right.
Okay. Right.
So you're imagine you're the boat. There's 200 feet, and then it's deep. Then it goes down to like the super deep areas where you have all the weird shit all the way at the bottom, right?
Yeah, all the bizarre James Cameron stuff.
The James Cameron zone, right? Right. So you're at that edge of that cliff, and what happens is a lot of times the sharks and other different kinds of pelagic fish, they're kind of riding that edge, trying to find things in that transition zone, right? Like basically most fish will not be in an open area. They're going to be in an area where there's a change in structure or change of something. So it's a good place to start. So what you do with that boat is you get it just on the other side of that cliff, and then you turn the boat sideways so it's pretty much parallel to the shore that's 6 miles behind you, right? And there's a steady wind that comes in towards the shore, right? As you can imagine, from the cold air of the ocean going out towards the shore, and so you have that push, and you're that's going to slowly push your boat back towards the shore over several hours, right? And what you do is, in front of the boat, you have a bucket filled with chum, right? Which
the classic Jaws stuff,
classic Jaws stuff. Except you're not just throwing shit out there, right? What you're doing is you're developing a slick, right? And in that chum is definitely chopped up little pieces of fish, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also a whole lot of fish oil that creates literally a slick on the water. And you can see very, very fine slick. And it's obviously it's fish oil. It's completely natural. It's perfectly good for the water, and it's going to eventually dissolve and everything. But it makes this slick, and it's a scent, right? That's there.
That leads the shark in.
It leads the shark. So the shark is going to go by that edge is going to see the slick and it's like, oh shit, there's something that died back there, or some action
I
going
get a
on.
piece of that.
And
yeah.
they'll come in, right?
Right.
So you're trying to attract sharks to come in through this slick, and you can wait for hours waiting
Right.
for this thing to happen, right? You're looking for all kinds of stuff. So you're looking at this slick, and you just sit there and you're swapping stories and you're looking things and moving the chum around. You're not throwing out buckets of fish like they were doing on Jaws,
Right.
but you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And then we saw these little blue sharks. I mean, they're probably like 2 feet long. And they're just sort of nibbling on the little pieces of fish that are coming around. You're just sort of looking at them. And then you see these birds sort of riding the waves, kind of also nibbling on the little pieces of fish that are coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And you're sort of waiting to see something's going to happen, right? If you see a bird suddenly get up,
Yeah,
there's
time to act.
something's coming, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
But nothing's going on. And we were waiting for a while and telling stories. And but you have to wear these polarized glasses to be able to see through the glare. That's one of the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not always going to see like a fin coming out of the water, but you have to sort of look for that as well, etc. And we're waiting and we're waiting, and suddenly I see a much bigger fish that's probably about 6 feet long. That's moving way faster. The 2 blue sharks are freaking gone. Right? And this one's darker gray, and it is moving fast in the water, like, right?
Yep.
But remember that these makos are top predators, so they have no fear of the boat. They've probably never really seen a boat. They have
Yeah, they don't have anything to activate it.
nothing to.
Fine.
So they're like, oh, there's got to be something around here. So they're just circling you, looking
Right.
for shit, right?
Right.
So it's like, okay, here it is. And so we're getting ready for this. And so I was the one that spotted it, and so I got the rod, and I'm ready to go on trying to catch this fish. And so he's doing the thing where he's tossing the teaser out there. I'm casting, and I'm doing an okay job. I screw up several times, but this fish is just reluctant. He's like, I keep wanting to get to that teaser, and he keeps, trying to get it. And every time I do a couple times where I get my fly in front of it, and turns on the teaser, leaves the fly there, ignores the fly completely. He's like, oh shit, he just doesn't want that. That fly didn't work. So you see that fly, it wasn't the right color, wasn't the right thing. This doesn't work, right? So we change flies, or change rods. He has several rods set up with different flies on it. Mm-hmm. So we change rods, gives me another rod with another fly. And then this one is it's red. And it's like, okay, so we did it. And he turns on the fly, hooks the fly, and most times you think you need to lift the rod. That's called a trout set, right? Mm-hmm. That's not going to work. If I do this, I'm just going to pull the fly right out of his mouth. It's going to be useless. You have to do what's called a strip set, where you take the line and you pull, and you're pulling it into their mouth, right?
Right.
So a lot of people are like, oh, that must hurt, right? Well, keep in mind of these sharks, right? They have big gnarly teeth right in front of their face. You can see these teeth right there. They go in 60 miles an hour and crunch down on a tuna or a sea lion or whatever they have, right? Crunching all their bones and everything else. If they had a bunch of nerve endings in their mouth,
it would
hurt.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't bite anything. Yeah.
Right. So they don't really feel much at all in their mouth at all, right? So I hook onto this thing, and something happened. I don't know what happened, but basically it yanked and it broke the fly, and it took off. Like the fly came off. Mm-hmm. The shark was still around. I was like, oh, cool. Okay. It's like, crap, what do we do? So finally, like, I bring it back in, and he's like, okay, he hands me another fly and goes like, okay, now this fly is harder to cast, but he'll probably take it. They'll really like it. It's like, it's really hard to cast. It's like, okay, but it's like, good. We had to make sure while the shark was still there, we had to take in the action, right? So finally get another opportunity, a couple opportunities. And we were trying this for a while. There's a video of this, which I can give you the link to, by the way, of this whole process. So finally get this new fly on there, and he comes in, and I hook it, and it's I'm pulling hard and I know I have him hooked, but the fish is just sort of like moving around like this, not doing much. And then sort of just, you can see his tail swooshing in the water, but it doesn't really figure out what's going on. And he goes, he's going to wake up. Just hold on. He's going to wake up in a second. And then suddenly, like, you know, you let go of the line and then you're on the reel and it starts, then it just, and you see just the reel is just spinning. So you have to be careful in fly reels because the handle of the reel, it's all connected. It's a spool that goes like this, like the rod goes like this, and the spool is parallel to the rod.
Right.
And the handle is going so fast that if you have your fingers there, it can break your fingers.
Sure. Yeah,
right.
It's going 200 miles.
So you have to be really careful, you know, how you manage this. You can put your hand below it, but not in front where the handle is.
Right.
So he takes off, gets a nice jump out of it, and I was trying to reel it in and fighting it. I was like, all right, you know, now it's just mano a mano, right? You're dealing with this fish. It's way out there. there. As I'm reeling it in, the reel breaks apart. It was a problem with the reel.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, oh shit. And so I'm trying to get it back together and very slowly managed to get this thing going. And I get after, I don't know, it's been 20 minutes or so,
right.
20, 30 minutes. I get the fish right up to the boat, finally get it close enough. I can see the leader coming in and then all of a sudden the fish is starting to come to the surface. And, at this point it's a different thing because you don't want to bring a shark onto a small boat.
That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Exactly. Right.
So what you do is you bring it up close, like right up against the boat, right? Uh-huh. And he's holding the leader because, I mean, listen, Conway's been doing this for a long time. He knows exactly what he's doing. So he's holding the leader and this is your time to be with this animal that you've never had an opportunity to see. And so I see it, you know, and it's probably about 85 pounds, this fish, right? It's got these, you've heard of it, like it's dark black eyes, right? And you're looking at, and it's gnarly teeth. And he's like, I'm sort of, you know, it's seeing me it's probably the first time it's ever seen a human, right? That's the first time I've ever seen this fish, and we're looking at each other in this weird scenario. And he's like, look at it. And he's like, this is an apex predator, man. And sort of, I'm communing with this fish. And this whole experience only took like 30 seconds, by the way. Sure. But it was really meaningful, right? And he's like, you want to touch it?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, yeah. And I go down and have you touched like leopard sharks at like
yeah, it has a weird sort of sandy quality to the skin.
Sandy quality, right?
Yeah, right?
Not this. Super slick.
Oh, wow.
Because it's so fast, right? It has to be fast, right?
No friction at all.
No friction. It's like Teflon, man.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it was just this surreal. And as I did that, the shark just thrashes out of the water. Totally terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Right? And he's like, do it again, baby. And so I got down there and it's like this, like my heart's pounding and I'm touching this animal, and it's got these the mako shark teeth are very pointy and very they just look like tons of needles out of its mouth, right? And so and then he has this metal pole that's got a little curly cue at the bottom, and he just holds it and he puts the curly cue right on the line and goes ka-punk, and then the line just comes out, like he just takes the hook out in like this one action, and the fish just goes away, and that's the end.
And then
it was just a surreal experience. So that's what I was supposed to do today, but it didn't happen.
But that's, I mean, like you said it in the middle of the story, but it is really communing. Like it is there's something very, very primal that you're spending a moment with.
That 30-second experience is like, I knew it, that's the one that's in Inside Out, like the long-term memory.
Yeah.
Like,
that's baked in there.
That's baked in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah. I can't imagine, man. I mean, because it seems to happen even on a smaller level with smaller fish, that moment of sort of like success and triumph and like connecting with an animal in that way.
Yeah.
And then in the natural world in that way. But like, it's so vivid and visceral to be right there with a very dangerous creature. Like that's no joke. Wow,
Yeah.
that is amazing. I'm sorry that you didn't get to do that today, but
I'll
I'm glad you got to
reschedule it.
join. I'm glad you got to join the podcast and tell the story. Anyway,
I got to tell the story, so
Yeah.
it makes up for it. But yeah, so that's what I love, man. That's a thing, and I think that, we're during the pandemic or during moments of stress, it's a thing that I can do, And I remember, there was another time when I was dealing with a pretty hard decision that I decided I needed to, a career decision I had to deal with, and it was around my birthday, and I remember being frustrated, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to take the afternoon off. I'm going to go to the LA River. I'm going to go look for some carp. And I caught a big ass carp that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that was like, oh, that's just what I needed.
right, right. Well, because you're centered in yourself when that's
you're
happening.
centered, right? And so I needed that experience of just doing something like that and finding that moment. And it's wonderful, and it's what's strange about it, as you can imagine, catching a shark like that is filled with adrenaline.
Sure. Right.
But the whole point of fishing is calmness. So when you have that combination of calm and adrenaline, and that you have to be super calm or it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And you can let the adrenaline take place when you hooked.
Yeah, when it's done, when it's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, having a lot of adrenaline and trying to cast a fly is not going to work. So you have to balance your emotions, and that experience is kind of a wonderful thing. I don't know. I loved it. I love it when I do it, and it's something that is big for me. And I talk about it a lot. I know, and I'm sorry about that.
No, this is why I wanted you to come on. Like I said, I mean, I knew the thing that you were going to be talking about. I knew that this is like one of the nearest and dearest things to your heart, and like I think that, like, whenever, like, the general thing that I love about talking to people about the things that they focus on like this is that ultimately it really does come down to this same generalized experience, which is like, this is a moment at which I get to be completely plugged into my experience. Like,
right.
There's no other baloney happening in the world. There's just this second, this momentary interaction or communion with myself and the world. And like, I think that it's just rare, to have it so
vivid
and physical as a mako shark.
There's something primal about it too, right? So there's not, while there's a lot of technology in some ways, it's not.
All that falls away. All that falls away.
I mean, if you really think about it, when I hooked in that fish, it's just a straight line of different kinds of string.
Yeah, exactly.
to connecting to one of the world's top predators. And
all that work and all this detail and all the money spent on it and everything all led up to this one moment, which had nothing to do with any of that, which is just like you right there. Yeah, I think that's spectacular, dude. Well, I thank you for coming on to talk about this, man. This is like, it's very inspiring to hear people talk about what they love. But you and I have been working together for many years, talking about stuff that we love.
Right.
And I know that this comes up a lot for you. I know that you have to spend a little energy to restrain yourself to talk about it sometimes when we're
talking about movies instead.
Talking about movies instead. So it feels really good to see you like run with it in the way that you love it. So I very much appreciate it, because like
hopefully I didn't tell you a lot of the same stories that I've said in the past. Maybe
no, this is like that is like 90% fresh material right there. It's very very exciting. That's actually fantastic. And like like you talk a lot about your sort of Texas experience. You talk about like your experience in Greece and et cetera. Like, but this is one of the first times for me everything sort of gets sewn together as one large statement
around fishing.
Around fishing, exactly. That's the thing that webs it all together. But I thank you very much for that. I love it as well, at least by proxy. And if there's anything that if someone's listening to this and they were caught by it in any way, what would you recommend is the great starting point for them to fall in love with it in the way that you have?
Well, depending on where you are, what first you need to do is you need to find a reputable fly shop. That's always the best place to start. Find a reputable fly shop in your area. And then you can go there and first of all, ask them a bunch of questions like, what kind of fly fishing is there around us here? What kind of stuff? Most fly shops will have an educational path that they do, and they will have like introduction to fly fishing or something like that. Take that class. Start with that class. Always start with that class. And that's a good way to do. And then also find out later, like, you know, you're going to have to spend some money on this stuff. So like, be sure you know what kind of budget you want to do. Or what you can get any, there is smaller budgets and bigger budgets, you know. Keep in mind, if you buy a really bunch of cheap fly stuff, it'll work for a while, but you can replace it pretty quickly.
You're going to spend more money
replacing it later than you can later. So just find the balance of what you want to do. But then some of those fly shops also have little group trips that they'll do, which are cheaper than hiring a single guide to teach you stuff, where they can take like, you know, 6 to 10 people out to show you a river or the surf or a lake or whatever situation that is, where you can do these trips, and also are also a lot of fun to do. So that's what I would do. But, you know, find out what you want to do. You know, if it's there's obviously trout fishing is a big one, but there's also carp fishing. People can shop for bass. We can go up on the lakes in the Great Lakes area. There's going to be like steelhead, which are basically really big trout, really big trout. Right. And then there's all kinds of stuff on the surf and all kinds of stuff, you know, like on the West Coast or on the East Coast, actually. There's stripers. You know, stripers on a fly are a lot of fun. And in Cape Cod, where you grew up, that's a big deal up there.
Yeah,
that's right. You can catch stripers, and you know, those are the big fish, as well as obviously you can catch bluefish and things like that. But then if you're Florida, I mean, it's saltwater fly fishing heaven, man. There's tarpon and permit and bonefish,
everything,
snook and redfish, all kinds of stuff. That Everglades has got some great stuff in that area. So all along the United States, there's always going to be something you can fish.
Well, that's awesome, Sarah. I want to thank you very much for joining me on Love It today. And you can catch the both of us regularly on Martini Giant at martinigiant.com, which is our film podcast, where, as deep as we've talked about Chris's love of fishing on this episode, we talk about Steve McQueen and Star Wars on that podcast.
And only one, and it goes even longer than this.
It's true. It is super epic. It is super epic. If you're into movies, that's the one to check out for sure. And if you're into CG or any of the technical aspects of CG, Chris goes very deep into that on CG Garage, which is now this is an award-winning giant podcast.
434 episodes as of today.
It's incredible, and he has some really, really incredible people on that. And I'm super blessed to have him on the show today, and I'm super blessed to work with him every week. So hopefully we'll catch you in one of those places a week from now. But thank you, everybody. This has been Love It, and I'll see you next week.